Hi, it's Nicola Bird here with the Little Peace of Mind podcast, bringing you a completely fresh, new understanding to help you find freedom from panic attacks, anxiety and stress, and experience peace of mind from the inside out. In this week's episode, you'll hear me talking to Mary Schiller. Mary has been a complete inspiration to me for a long, long time, and it was such an honour to get together with her to create this podcast with her. And what I loved about this particular episode is that it really, really looks to us like circumstances and people can make us feel a certain way. And Mary's story is one of the most extreme examples of circumstances, and her insights as to what's possible with this understanding in terms of having a completely different experience of what happened to her just are mind-blowing and inspirational, and I think you're really going to enjoy hearing her story. So hi Mary, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi Nicola.
It's so nice to have you here. Mary and I haven't actually spoken or connected in person, even though we've been flirting around each other on Facebook for years, right? And admiring each other's work, and you know, I've read all of Mary's books, and I've been a big fan for a long time. So it's so exciting to actually get
I know
here on this podcast.
Really fun.
I feel like Christmas has come. I'm looking forward to this all week. So Mary, I wanted to reach out to. I wanted her to come as a guest onto this podcast, because what we've been doing here is sharing these on this podcast is like sharing these stories of people who have been through all sorts of different circumstances in their lives and found a way through that to peace of mind. And I get so many people, Mary, who come to me, and I guess you do too, who are like, yeah, but my circumstances are different. Like, you don't understand how bad my upbringing was, or you don't understand the relationships I've been through. You don't understand. I have PTSD, so there's nothing I can do about it. Mm-hmm. You don't understand. You've never stood in my shoes. And although what I teach and what you teach and what we share is fundamental and applies to all human beings, whatever you've been through, I just think there's something so powerful and so hopeful when you hear a story of someone who has been in your shoes and been through it, because then you really see that hope is possible, right? And you see if it's possible for that person, it's possible for anybody. And so that's one of the reasons that well, A, just because I wanted to meet you, but B, like I know through reading your books that, you know, you've had some crap that's happened in your life, and yet what you've seen and how you've moved through it, like undoubtedly you have a far greater experience of peace of mind. I know that without even having met you, just from having read what you write. Mm-hmm. But there's many people who are listening who won't know your backstory or won't know anything about you at all, haven't met you yet. Mm-hmm. And I know it's hard to do it in sort of a nutshell, but do you want to just tell people a little bit about your background and how you came to this understanding?
Sure.
And then we'll dig in a little bit more, and I'll just ask you questions as we go.
Okay. So I was somebody who was brought up in a very nice home, generally speaking. My parents were older when I was born, which was unusual back then. I was born in 1961, and my parents were in their 40s when they had me. And I had two older siblings who are 20 years and 17 years older. Mm. So I was kind of raised as an only child, essentially. But it was a very nice upbringing. And I went to college. I went to UCLA, which was my dream school. So I was very happy to go there. And while I was there, I met a man and decided to get married right after I graduated. And we hadn't known each other all that long. I had met him through his sister, and everything seemed fine leading up to the wedding. I didn't have any major signs that anything was awry. I had met all of his family, didn't see anything there that would have warned me off or anything like that.
Mm.
And everything changed literally the moment we got married. He essentially raped me on our wedding night. So that was how I started married life at age 22. I went into sort of a state of shock, I think, when that happened. I had never experienced any kind of violence before. And like I said, my family life was not at all that way. So it was very, it just came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what to do about it. And I went through a period, as you might imagine, of kind of wondering what actually happened and like kind of questioning myself. Like, what was that? Was that what I think it was? I think it was, and kind of going around in circles. And things just kind of went downhill from there. The abuse escalated, and I was very, very confused about what was going on, to the point where during the marriage, I was the one who sought counseling help. But none of the counselors ever asked me about domestic violence, if I was afraid of him, if there was anything like that going on in the home, and I didn't mention it.
Right.
Mostly because, and I know this seems really weird, but I didn't know what was happening in my marriage. It didn't make any sense to me. And this was back in the 80s. This was not a topic widely discussed at that time. I didn't know anyone who had been through this. So I ended up staying in that marriage for 7 years. About 5 years into it, I had my daughter. And things were a little bit better around that time. Like when I was pregnant with her, he was quite nice and there was no abuse at all. He was very helpful. And I thought, oh, maybe we've turned a corner here. Maybe something's changed. But then shortly after she was born, he kind of went back to the way that he had been before. And so being still very young, I was at that time 27, 28, I decided, oh, well, I'll get pregnant again. Maybe I can stop this that way. So I got pregnant again. And in that situation, the abuse actually escalated. And there were a couple of incidents. It's hard to say whether it caused the miscarriage or not, but I had a miscarriage. But I'm actually quite grateful that that happened because I ended up making the decision to leave shortly thereafter. And that was a very tense time for me because by that point, I was getting clearer on what was going on in the marriage. He had threatened my life several times, had, been physically abusive to the point where I could very easily see the writing on the wall if I stayed. And I had a young child at that time. She was just a toddler. So I knew that she was in danger, so I had to do something. And so I left, and it was quite a major ordeal for me to leave. And unfortunately, the abuse didn't end when I left the marriage. As it turned out, I didn't know it until afterwards, but he was abusing her. And I tried to stop that through the court system and the legal system and the law enforcement system, and was unable to do anything in that regard because she was so young at that time. She was about 3. And nobody believed, well, I shouldn't say that. The psychologist believed her, and many of the people I spoke to believed her, but it wasn't enough for a judge. And so for the next several years, I, dealt with custody things. I had to hand her over to him almost every weekend. And eventually I realized that the abuse had continued all that time. And we went through the whole court system again. And at that point, finally, a judge ruled in our favor, saying that she didn't have to see him anymore. But that was I got married to him in 1983, and that judge's ruling was 2001.
Oh, Mary.
So, okay, so it's a long time to be actively having to deal with somebody who was that abusive and scary, frankly. He was a scary person. And so, as you might expect, you know, I'm speaking for myself now, not for my daughter, but I personally had a lot of residual effects that I dealt with. When I first left the marriage, I didn't really get still what was going on until I went into a mandatory counseling session that you have to have in LA when you get a divorce and there's a child involved. You have to go to a counselor. And I was sitting in the counselor's office. This is in 1990. And I saw this poster on the wall about domestic violence. And it said, if you've experienced any of these things, and there were like 20 things on the list, you know, then you're probably in an abusive relationship. Well, I checked all the boxes.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, light bulb moment. Like, this is what's going on here. So I did see some counselors specifically related to that over the years. Didn't really do any good. I continued to seek help in various ways, both sort of from the traditional side of things and the non-traditional side, through all kinds of self-help and meditation and you name it. And nothing really helped me. Nothing really helped me. And I was pretty upset about that, because I reached a point in 2013, 2014, where I was just really angry. And I was like, you know, I made the mistake of marrying the wrong person. And I feel like my whole life has just been a disaster. Like, I failed in every respect.
Yeah.
You know? And that's how I found myself.
And was that, Mary, was that, so the experience then of like these things that happened, but then say if we fast forward to like 2011, 2012, so what was it? You were experiencing anxiety, depression? Was it just continually berating yourself? Like what, you know, obviously because your marriage had finished, the relationship had finished. So what was it that was still going on for you at that time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I got remarried in 1997, and I was never depressed. That's not been an issue for me.
Yeah.
But what my experience was like was more of I would get very, very tense and anxious. You know, sounds, people too close to me, you know, all kinds of things like that. I would just set off. I felt like I could never relax ever, no matter what the situation was. It didn't matter. I never felt peaceful. I never felt like I had a purpose in life. Literally my only life goal, and I say this now, and it's sort of hard for me to envision this. My only goal in life was to live long enough for my daughter to turn 18.
Wow.
Because I thought, if I can just live until she's 18, then I know for sure she'll never have to see him again.
Wow.
And so once she hit 18 and I was, you know, in my mid 40s, I was like, okay, I literally had this thought, well, I can die now. I've done what I'm supposed to do. I lived long enough for her to turn 18. So that's it. And it wasn't like a depressed thought. It was like, okay, well, I've filled my life's purpose. So, and then when I didn't die, I was kind of like, okay, well, now what? And I had
what's the point of life now? I've done what I've been trying to do for the last 18 years.
I didn't really have any goals. I had sort of, in career-wise, I had sort of done things that just came easily for me, but not things I was necessarily interested in. I'd worked in communications and writing, and had been a university writing instructor and course developer and things like that, but nothing that I was all that passionate about or anything, because I didn't have that way of seeing life. That wasn't what my life was about. It was just about staying alive, literally.
Survival. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's really how it played out for me.
And if I remember rightly from reading your books, like pretty much on and off in therapy, traditional therapies that whole time, right? Trying to to fix this broken life of yours, right?
Yes.
Or so it looked.
Yeah. And I saw the final therapist I saw was in 2011, 2012 for about 16 months. And she was a specialist in people like me, women who had been through, multiple sexual assaults, had been, through domestic violence and things like that. And I'll never forget one thing that she said to me. It was so, I didn't really know how to take it, so I'll just say it. She said, I'm really surprised you've done as well as you have in life. You've gotten a couple of advanced degrees, you've gotten remarried, you've had a reasonably successful career, and I don't know how you've been able to do that. And she said, most of the women that I see who have experienced less severe violence than you either kill themselves or become alcoholics or drug addicts or really not very functional in society. And I remember thinking, is that a compliment that she does?
I'm not sure. I can't work it out now.
I just thought it was funny, but not, it's like, And to me, I saw what she was seeing, but through my eyes, my life looked like a disaster.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, yeah. So I've been able to make some money and I've been able to write a few things. So
my life sucks.
Right. It's like underneath that, who cares what that looks like? That seemed like whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. So go
ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so what happened?
Well, an interesting thing happened all through that period of time. So the only area of my life, and this is going to sound strange, maybe considering what I just said, but the only area of my life that I ever felt good about was being my daughter's mom.
Yeah.
And I felt like, despite the fact that I couldn't prevent the abuse, even though I tried everything I could think of to stop it, even though I couldn't prevent that, I still felt like that was the one area of life that I was pretty good at.
Yeah.
And so I kept thinking to myself, somewhere in the back of my mind, it wasn't even a conscious thought really, it was just sort of back there like, well, I can't be all bad, because look, I can do this.
Yeah.
And I felt like that little germ of hope kept me looking for something.
Yeah.
And I felt like I want to be an even better mom. If that's the thing that I was here to be, then I want to do that even better.
Yeah.
So I'm going to keep looking. And around the time that I was seeing that counselor, this is actually funny too, I wrote a novel, and the main character's name is Hope Hunter. And I basically named her after myself because I felt like that. I felt like I was hunting for some answer.
Yeah.
And then this is where you come into the picture. So one day I was on my computer and I was looking for an online tool that I could use for teaching people. And I ran across your former company, right?
Yeah.
Jigsaw Box.
Yeah.
I don't know how it came, probably in a search result or something. I don't know. And I didn't end up actually on the Jigsaw Box website. I ended up someplace else where you had posted a video where you were talking about Michael Neal's book, The Inside Out Revolution.
I know that video.
Do you know that video?
Yeah, I know that video.
And so I was like, I don't know who this person is, but she sounds really enthusiastic about this.
I feel like, read this book. Was I going like that?
You're holding it up and you're like,
change your life. Yeah. Yeah.
And I had this thought of, because you were kind of talking about it and I didn't understand what you were saying.
Yeah.
It was like, I have no idea what she's saying, but she seems really nice and really enthusiastic. So,
and I was probably saying, read this book. I have no idea what it says, but you'll really enjoy it.
And I thought to myself, well, I've got nothing else to lose, right? So I bought the book. I bought the paperback, the ebook, and the audiobook. I figured I might as well just immerse myself in this. And I was really, to say that I was skeptical would be putting it mildly, because I thought he was a very arrogant person
Right.
say the subtitle is the only thing you need to know to change your life forever.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, sure. Like,
Yeah, I've
you
heard,
know,
like, I haven't heard that before over the last 20 years.
exactly.
Another person who's going to change my life forever.
Right. Right. So I went into it pretty negative, I have to admit. And so I listened to it because I had a fairly long commute. I was living in New York City at the time, and I had a fairly long commute. So I was listening to it on the subway. And I listened to it the first time through, and I didn't get it.
Yeah.
I really didn't understand what he was saying. But there was something in there that seemed different to me. And so I'm the kind of person where if I come across something that I don't understand, I want to understand it.
Yeah.
So I just made a decision, well, I'm going to listen to this as many times as it takes for me to understand what he's saying. So that's what I did. I listened to it over and over and over.
Me too.
I would get to the end and I'd start it again. And then I'd look in the book, you know, on paper, and I'd find passages and go, now, what does he mean by this? What is he saying? Until I heard it for myself.
Yeah. And what kind of landed for you when you actually heard something for yourself? What was the
Well, the biggest piece for me that I got right away, well, not right away, but when I finally heard something, was that there was never anything actually wrong with me. That all of the talk about me having this incurable mental illness that I was just going to have to deal with, et cetera, was a mirage. And it's hard to overstate the magnitude of this, because you have to remember that the first time I saw a counselor, I was 22 after I had gotten married, and I was like 52 at this point.
Yeah.
And that whole time, I had thoroughly been indoctrinated into this notion that I was sick and that I was broken and unfixable.
Yeah.
And I saw somehow, I couldn't even pinpoint what it was in the book that showed me this, but whatever. I saw, just as plain as I'm talking right now, that nothing had harmed me ever. That the me that is not in this form was never touched by anything or anybody. And that the only thing I was ever dealing with was some thoughts that were going through my head that I was listening to, paying attention to, reacting to. And that I say this sometimes and people look at me weird, but I'm going to say it anyway because it seems really true to me. I realized that even if I had been killed in that marriage, if one of those times he had actually taken my life, I still would have been fine. And that was probably the most freeing moment I have ever experienced in my life. It's pretty major. And seeing that the whole part of the whole role of thought, and recognizing that I was no different from any other human being on this planet who has thinking that we listen to sometimes. That was it. It was kind of like, oh, I get it. We all do this. But my thinking just happens to look a certain way, and yours happens to look another way.
But the most amazing thing that I read in your book, your most recent book, was that you saw that he was him too. Mm-hmm. That's huge, right? This man who, hit you, abused you, him too.
Yeah. That took about a year after that for me to see. I think, maybe a little bit less. But yeah, I saw that we were the same, essentially. You know, our behavior was different, and it didn't excuse his behavior.
Yeah.
But the crucial question that people are always asking in these situations is, why would somebody act like that?
Yeah.
I was tormented by that question. Tormented. Why would he do that? Why? And I suddenly had the answer. Well, of course, because he was reacting to thinking that told him that that was how he needed to behave in order to feel better about himself. Didn't have anything to do with how he was brought up, or it was all the same as every other person. It just came out in different behaviors.
Yeah, it's the whole fish in water experience, right? Where we live with the thinking that goes on in our head, and unless someone shows us something different, we think that is true, and we walk around in a reality that looks fixed and real, and every person does the best they can, given the thinking that looks real to them, even if it looks like hitting somebody or abusing somebody.
Yes, exactly.
The best people know how to do, given the thinking they've got in their head right there, and the level of consciousness and the state of mind they're in. But most importantly, that people have no idea that their thinking is not them.
Right, exactly.
I
certainly didn't.
No, me either, right? Because nobody tells us, right?
Nobody told me that. It was so ingrained in me that my thoughts were indicative of me as a person, my health, my everything.
Yeah.
You know, there was never a person, and I stopped counting. I tried to count how many different professionals I saw. I saw more than 25. I stopped counting at 25. Yeah. There wasn't one of those 25 who said anything remotely like this, or who saw me as someone who was actually fine and didn't have a problem.
Yeah.
And I find that actually quite remarkable.
Me too. Right. And that's what I find, and you must have this with your clients as well. Like, so many of my clients, when they start to get a feel for this, they're like, well, where has this been? Why isn't this thing that we're pointing to, like this understanding about how we create our experience through thought, that we're fundamentally unbroken, unfixed, and we're whole? Like, where is it? Why isn't anyone seeing that? And, that's why you write your books. That's why I do this podcast, right? Is we want to be able to take this out there more widely. But what I find really hopeful is that in the groups that I run for my clients, the Facebook group, I get stories of people saying, I rang a mental health hotline the other day because I felt like at my wit's end. Mm-hmm. And the person who picked up the phone at the end, I explained to them that I found out about this thing called the 3 principles. And they said, oh yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And they recommended me a Sydney Banks book to read. And that was an NHS hotline.
Really?
Yeah. And then someone else saying, oh, there's someone coming to talk to my kids' school in my tiny little village about the principles. Like, how cool is this? It's in my village. And when I hear, it gives me goosebumps. When I hear stories like that, it helps me see that, this understanding is starting to filter through. It's not mainstream yet, but it can't not be at some point, just because it's so transformative. It takes people who believe that they're broken, you, me both, right? My experience with anxiety is the same thing. One of the earlier podcasts I recorded was about my psychologist. Actually, maybe he did see this, I don't know, but he had a piece of paper and he had these sentences written on it. And one of the sentences that he wanted me to say out loud was, I am normal, right? Like, I'm normal. And it was just like, I was pretty scared, and I do most things that people told me to do, but I could not say that sentence to myself, because I fundamentally, really in my bones, I knew that I was not normal, and that I was weird, and I was broken, and I was and I was ashamed of all of that. And there's no way I could bring myself to speak that lie aloud as far as I was concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like seeing that all the crap that goes on in our lives, and yet underneath that there's this solid health that has never been touched by any of it. No matter what you've been through, and your circumstances are some of the most extreme, right, that we can imagine, especially those of us listening as women. It always comes down to, yeah, but what if somebody's actually hitting you?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like that's outside in. Actually, share with me how you respond to people when they come to you, because I hear that with women a lot when we have this discussion. They imagine the most extreme, and the two things that come up is like, yeah, but what if I lost all my money and I was a bag lady under a bridge? That tends to be where we go as women, right? Like, surely you're not saying, I remember saying to Michael Neal, you're telling me that if I was a bag lady under a bridge with only 2 of my 3 children still surviving and them rooting around in bin bags in front of me for their tea, that I would have peace of mind as much as I would do now sitting in my nice house in Surrey with my healthy kids and all the rest of it? And he said, yes.
Mm-hmm.
He said, the possibility exists. And I was like, get out of here.
Well, you know,
that's the other example is that, like, yeah, but what if somebody's hitting you? That's outside in. That's like someone is hitting you. That's got to create a feeling in you. That's got to make you feel a certain way. That, like, it's so hard for us to comprehend that that's not true. But what's your response to that?
Well, I agree with Michael and Michael's point that it's, even though it looks that way, it never is. That's why I like this so much, because there is no exception.
Yeah.
There is no exception. So everything you experience comes from inside. And the way you can tell is, so what I did after I kind of got what Michael was saying, I ran a bunch of experiments. I spent weeks testing this to make sure it was actually real.
Mm.
And so you can test it. You can say, well, if someone, if some people get hit or, hurt, what do? They might submit to it or they might fight back. Well, why is that? Because they have a different thought and they respond to that. It's not from the outside. And I just tested it. I tested things like that over and over again, not with the hitting part, but like some days on the subway, I would feel really anxious, and other days I wouldn't, even though the actual situation was almost identical, crowded train, whatever. And I would be like, well, why is that? And how is that true then? It can't be the subway. It can't be the people on the subway. Yeah. Because here I am sitting in the same seat practically, in the same exact set of circumstances, and yet I'm having a completely different experience one day to the next. And that's what I did. And that's what I tell people to do. I'm like, don't believe me. I don't want you to believe me. I want you to see this for yourself.
Yeah.
And test it out.
And I remember in the book as well, you were sharing that you were, again, sitting on the subway. Lots of your insights seem to happen around public transport. Like, weird, huh? Like some people it's the shower. Mary does it on the subway. Yeah. So I guess it's because we zone out, right?
Yeah, and I have a lot of time to sit there. So,
well, if your intellectual brain switches off for a time, you just start going gorming, and then that's when it gives you a chance to have an insight, right? But I remember you in the book talking about sitting on the subway and realizing that I have all this anxious thinking. And I think it's caused by my husband or ex-husband, but he's not even here. So I've got to be experiencing my thinking. I can't be experiencing him or his behavior towards me because he's not even here.
I hadn't seen him in years by that point. And it just looked so obvious to me that I didn't know how I had missed it before. And I actually felt rather stupid. Not like in a berating sense, like, oh, you dummy, but like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this has been staring me in the face the whole time. And I just didn't even see it.
Well, that's that's the nature of insight, isn't it? Quite
I
often
guess, yeah.
a head slapping moment where you're like, 20 years I've been trying to fix that and it's never actually broken.
Right, exactly. Oops. But here's the kind of cool thing is that so that was about 3 years ago that I came across the book through your video. And in those 3 years now, one major thing that's changed is that I've been able to look back on a life that looked like it was mired in failure and disaster, and I've seen it in a completely different way. You know, as you mentioned, I saw my ex-husband's behavior differently. I had some understanding of why he was behaving that way. And so all of that shifted around. I could look back and see very clearly, explaining that therapist's point about my ability to create things, you know, even though I was ostensibly messed up. I could see times in my life where clearly that well-being was right at the surface and was helping me do things work-wise, or, you know, earning money, or relationships that were good and things like that. So I no longer saw my life as a complete mess the way I did before.
That's
a biggie.
That's so key though, because I think what we don't realize is that, like, right here, right now, you and I can have a thought of our past, and we'll have a story of our past, whether it was good, whether it was bad, whether it was awful, which bits were amazing, which bits were terrible. And all we can experience right here, right now, right in this minute is our thought in this minute about the whole past. The whole, like, in an instant, we'll have one thought that encompasses all my last 45 years. And if we don't understand that we create our experience from the inside out, like our reality is created through thought, we think that whatever I think about my past in this moment is true. That's what's happened. It's a fact. I did have a crappy childhood. I did have a horrible husband. I did have this relationship with my children. I wasn't as good a mum as I wanted to be, or whatever examples that we draw from our past, and we can see the evidence of them, right? We can swear blind that it's fact, right? And I failed at my academics, or I didn't succeed in my job, or whatever. But what's amazing is that because that's made of thought, we can't experience the past any other way. So we can have one moment, we can have an experience of our past through thought. But because thought shifts and changes, and as we have insights, we see the truth more clearly, it's like our thought changes, our experience changes, and then next week when we think about our past, it's a completely different story. Right. You know, that's what you're sharing.
Yes.
And that it's a completely different story. And you can swear blind. You can point to examples of where you were a good mother, where your well-being showed through, where, you know, that you feel a completely different way about your husband. Like you have compassion for someone that you were terrified of and thought was a horrible person. And it's like, that is so hopeful to me. That any experience I have that in my head just looks awful, that in a moment that can shift and change, and then I have a completely different experience of essentially the same things, because they only ever existed through thought.
Precisely.
I think that's amazing. So in your life now, like, do you still have moments of anxiety? Do you have a pretty pink and fluffy life? Do you have, like, what does life look like now?
I have stress sometimes, not nearly like I used to, but I don't care.
Yeah, and that's the difference, right?
You know, so I'll have a day or two when I'm feeling kind of stressed out, and I don't really even bother to investigate it in any way because I know what the source is. I don't spend any time worrying about that. And it rarely has any material effect.
Yeah.
So I can have kind of any set of feelings and continue to do whatever I want. Whereas before it would just stop me in my tracks. I wouldn't be able to function. Or if I was functioning, I would function at a much lower level.
Yeah.
And now I don't really feel like there's much that impedes me in a creative sense or work sense or anything.
That's freedom, right?
It's really freeing when you no longer care what your feelings are and you don't worry about them.
Yeah.
Because I constantly, and I'm sure people listening to this know what I mean, and you do too, I constantly worried about the fact that I was having all of those symptoms because I thought they indicated that I was sick.
Yes.
And that I was hurting myself and that I was hurting other people and on and on and on. And now it doesn't look that way to me at all.
Yeah.
They look simply like, fluctuating waves on the top of the ocean or something. They don't really have any meaning to them in the same way that they did before.
And that I think, as we come to the end of the call for people listening, is going to sound mind-blowing in the way that when you and I both stumbled across Michael's stuff, you're like, I don't really get it, but oh my goodness, if I could have an experience of life where I didn't really care much what I was feeling, like I didn't have to constantly check in with myself and scan myself before I made any decisions about what to do today. Well, I don't know, how am I feeling? How will I be feeling? How will that impact me? Will that push me over the edge? Can I do that? Can I not? To have a life where those thoughts can still show up, but you don't have to pay any attention to them.
Mm-hmm.
To have a life where how you're feeling doesn't impede what you're doing on that day. Like that to people listening is going to be one of the most hopeful things I think they've ever heard.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hope it is.
Well, because it's hope that's the thing that kind of, to me, hope is the thing that people get when they, like I have an audio on my website, when people read your books, the thing you get from them is that feeling of hope. And I think that's the first breadcrumbs that show you that there's something that, like, come this way, there's something here. And even if you don't understand anything that Mary and I have talked about, and even if you're sitting there going, yeah, but my husband's hitting me like today and I'm in that situation and this doesn't apply to me. If you're hearing and you're listening and it's touching you in some way, then it's this conversation's already starting to have an impact. And it's like, just gently keep looking this way. Or go full on like Mary, buy the book and watch it over and over and over and over and over and over. She's just determined like that. Do whatever way you want to, right? I signed up with Michael Neer and followed him around the world for a year. You think reading the books really? I'm like, yeah, I'll apprentice. I'm going to follow that man around because there's something there that I want to learn. I learned so much from that experience. I did 3 years of full-on immersion with the best teachers I could find in this field because I just knew I have no idea what you're talking about, but there is something here that in 20 years of studying psychology and personal development, I have never come across this before. And it is so simple and so hugely transformative that, just keep looking. That's what I want to end up with by saying.
Well, yeah. And one last point is, and I hope you don't take this the wrong way, Nicola, but there's nothing unique about you and me.
No.
There's nothing special about us in this way.
Yeah.
That what we're talking about is universal. It's not like I happened upon something for me that was, it's not like that.
Yeah.
These are principles and things that apply across the board with everyone. Yeah. And an understanding of them can help everyone, no matter how it might look to them.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something about, even if you can't see it, the fact that you have innate mental health isn't just Mary and I have done something really cool that means we now know this. It's like, it doesn't matter even if you know it or not, like it's there and we know it's there. And if you keep looking, you'll see it eventually for yourself because it is there. Like you say, it's not just that we've done some special thing or we did some Michael Neal immersion and that made the magic happen. It's like there was something there that was true, and it had always been true, and it always will be true, even after we die or are killed or whatever. That is fundamentally the same for all human beings, and it's there even if you can't see it right now.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mary. This has been so lovely. We're definitely going to hang out more often now.
I know. Thanks, Nicola. This is great.
So if people want to read your books or find out more about you, and I know you've got all these free resources and wonderful material, where's the best place for them to go to start with?
They can go to my website, which is simply my name, maryschiller.com. And my books are all on Amazon, so you can also search for me there. And most of them are they're either free or really, really inexpensive, so they're accessible to everybody.
Yeah, and they're all, the feedback in my Facebook group from people who read your books is that they are so simple and practical and just really resonate with people. That's what I love about them, their simplicity.
That's great.
That's why we connected with that. Definitely.
Thank you.
I'll put the link to those as well below the podcast episode on the blog so that people can click through and find out more.
Great.
In the meantime, thank you so much for spending your time with us.
Thanks, Nicola.
If you're curious to find out more about what I've been talking about on this episode, the best place to start is to go to alittlepeaceofmind.co.uk, and there you'll find my audio, Freedom from Anxiety, and you can listen to that. Is the best place to start to get some of this understanding into your own bones so it can start making a difference to your life. Until next time, I'll speak to you later.